Good day to you. But I am John R. Zabala, a student nurse from Isai State University, and this is my turn demonstration for assessing the newborn reflexes. So, what are the reflexes for? It is for assessing the early development of the newborn. Because of course lahi naman ng mga um, ang new neural pathways and reflexes in newborn from a developed person. So yeah, that is it. And of course, since some of these reflexes are necessary because we develop as people manjud, they would disappear over time. So according to my reference videos, there are eight um, reflexes to be assessed, and such reflexes are um, the motor reflex, the grasp reflex, the rooting reflex, the sucking reflex, the Babinski reflex, the step reflex, the crawling reflex, and the tonic neck reflex. Okay, so now I'll be proceeding to demonstrate how to assess these reflexes. So let's first go on to the grasp reflex. So there are two reflexes to assess in this kind of reflex. That is the palmar and the plantar reflex. So for a newborn, since unfortunately I wasn't able to get a toy or a makeup bakaha for this reflex, so some of these reflexes will be demonstrated by my own body parts, such as the hands or the toes or feet, and some for with this kangaroo stuffed dog. Okay, so for the plantar reflex, the palmar reflex, of if a it would be assessed by placing an object or your finger to the palm of an infant, and by probing and placing your finger or an object the palm of the infant would immediately grasp or flex their fingers to grasp that object. So that reflex would disappear by 4 to 6 months. And then to the plantar reflex, for example, these are the toes of the, no, let's do this now. This is the plantar of the infant kanuhay. These are the toes, and this is the rest of the sole of the foot of the infant. So by placing an object near the toes of the toes of the infant would flex and grasp, seemingly grasping on your finger or an object is placed on the toes of the infant. So kind of similar to the palmar grasp reflex. So that plantar reflex would disappear from approximately 9 months to a year. So these estimations of the disappearance of the reflexes are approximate study because of course from studies there are just averages and according to the reference I'm said, and it's of course approximate and not all findings are the same. Okay, so moving on to the moral reflex, or also known as startle reflex. So to elicit this reflex and assess this reflex on an infant, it is to create a loud noise, a sudden loud noise to an infant, and the reflex of the infant would be to, if they were just on supine and then lying on their back and at rest, they would immediately throw up their arms and then open their hands, so as if to fend off any dangerous or startling things in front of them. So it's like a defense mechanism of a baby, according to my book reference. So yeah, that's it. And also one way to again assess this reflex is by placing the baby supine on your hands, and then putting the head lower to the body like that, and that would immediately, or not immediately, or I don't know, I don't have experience, but according to reference, it would also elicit the same reflexes on the baby. They would throw up their arms and then open their hands. So that is the moro or startling or startle reflex. So the next reflex is the rooting reflex. So as for this reflex, it is to for the baby to find a food source. So in order um, to assess this reflex, we are to put an object or a stroke the cheek or the corner of the mouth of an infant, and then the reflex of the infant will be to turn their head towards the direction of that object that stroked their cheek or their mouth. So yeah, by doing this to the cheek of the infant, the head of the infant would turn to the direction of the object that is touching their body part. So yeah, so for example, this is the head and this is the mouth here and the cheek here. So by doing this, the head of the infant would turn to that direction, and and that reflex would disappear by approximately 4 months. And of course, kauban ana niya is the sucking reflex. According to the reference, if an object is placed on the roof of the mouth of the infant would immediately begin sucking on the object. So here. So that's it. And so muna siya pa-assess sa sucking reflex, and again, the same as the rooting reflex, 4 months. And next would be the Babinski reflex. So as for this reflex, it is done on the foot, on the sole of the infant. By stroking an J motion on the foot of the infant, what we are looking for is for the the toes of the infant to dorsiflex, and so naka-ana man sila, so ana siya ang feet bend backwards, and then fan out ang iya toes. So niana anak ko na example mo niyang foot sa infant mo bend backwards and then mo fan out siya from toes sa infant. So dire on a J motion. Opposite siya sa kuan sa adults, because of course for us our reflex would be to curl up kaya yung tagalan sa sensation. Okay, so mo to siya, and that would disappear from approximately 1 year. Okay, so moving on to the crawling reflex. The crawling reflex of the baby would be assessed by putting the baby on their stomach and placing pressure. It could be using your hands on the foot of the baby, and what the response of the baby to that pressure would be to push against the hand and move their arms and legs as if trying to crawl. So man siya ang crawling reflex, and that would tend to disappear by from a few weeks to a couple months. Man siya according to our friends. And also moving on to the step reflex. By holding the baby vertically and then having the foot of the baby touch a surface, the legs of the baby would attempt to move as if walking. So mo na siya ang step reflex. And according to my source, it would tend to disappear from 4 to 6 months. Okay. So, and lastly, one naman ato nila, lastly is the tonic neck reflex. So, and to assess this reflex, when the baby is lying supine, when if the head of the baby is turned to one side, the extremities or the arm and leg on that side of the baby would be extended to the same direction in which the head of the baby is facing, while on the opposite side, the opposite arms and legs would remain flexed. So that is the last reflex, which is the tonic neck reflex, or also known as the fencing reflex. And that reflex would tend to disappear by 4 months. So approximately 4 months. So mo na siya ang mga 8 reflexes according to my reference, but also from another reference, a book reference, and there are also other reflexes, pero some can of course accessible gihapon. For example, there are other also 7 siguro. So there is the blink reflex, same as the adults. If mo hold a light to the eyes of the infant, they would blink in response to the bright lights. And also the books mentioned that they would also blink when an object is approaching near to the eye, but it's not as reliable. Okay, so that is the blink reflex. Also, another reflex would be the swallowing reflex. The same we have as adult. Now, when food reaches by the posterior portion of the tongue, so the infant would immediately would also swallow it. And then there's also the opposite, the extrusion reflex. The extrusion reflex is found in an infant when a solid food is introduced to the mouth of the infant. And the reflex would be when the food touches the anterior portion of the tongue, they would not swallow it but expel it out of their mouth. I don't know, basta kiba na taana, no? Na di sila muton og mga solid food. And that would disappear by approximately 4 months. Ang sa swallowing reflex day, kauban na sad ang coughing, gagging, o sneezing na reflex. Kaya present na siya para di makablock sa airway sa infant. And next would be the trunk curvation reflex. So when mo probe ka sa hand, mo stroke ka sa hand sa the side sa trunk sa baby, the trunk of the baby would flex to that side along with the pelvis of the baby when they are lined placed on their stomach. So imo i-touch ang this side of the baby and then mo flex towards the direction in which you are touching the side of the baby. So that is the trunk curvation reflex. And also there is the Landau reflex, and that is when an infant is held by a hand, supported by the hand by the trunk, and lying supine on your hand. This is to check the muscle tone of the infant. So if imo siya butang sa mo hand nakasupine, the infant should not sag like an inverted U. So nakalaylay ba? Di dapat siya nakalaylay because there's a certain muscle tone naman dyan sa infant. So if nakaingat to get siya like an inverted U, naglaylay siya, that means the muscle tone of the infant is extremely poor. And then there is also the cross extension reflex. So that is assessed on the legs of the infant. When a sharp object is stroke to the lower extremities of the infant, other leg niya would raise up, would extend, as if the same as a motor reflex mo push up niya ang nag-cause sa sensation at big sharp yun, more defensive siya gyapon na mechanism sa baby. So mo to siya ang cross extension reflex. And lastly, napato ang deep tendon reflex. The same gyapon sa adult, pero according to my book reference, ang nakita ra is ang patellar and ang sa bicep na deep tendon reflex. So mo to siya sa tuhod and ang dere sa siko na reflex. The same gyapon mo gamit ka og itong hammer. Porque ba naman ang deep tendon reflex na ang sa day dapita hit ang this region, and then the arm with the baby would extend in response to the pressure or the of the hammer, and also the carry sa leg sa ato tendon diri sa ato patellar. So yeah, that ang sa mga other atong ni-mention ko 8 ka reflexes, and the other reflexes that I mentioned after that, sa book reference, wala siya moingon og span of time when actually sila mo disappear. So I guess sa common sense lang gamitan, no? So more or less, more like mo continue na sila or present kapon sila throughout the development of the baby. Pero of course, katong sa extrusion, ma-disappear siya by 4 months, approximately 4 months as mentioned ganina. So those are the procedures to be done when assessing the reflexes of a newborn infant. So that would be all for my return demonstration, and thank you for your time. Thank you.